Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to direct my questions to Professor Geist. Since October 7th, there has been a massive increase in anti-Semitic hate and violence in Canada. Just yesterday, you wrote a column on this topic entitled "Words Are Not Enough," in which you note that since October 7th, Canadian Jewish communities have faced relentless anti-Semitic incidents. Schools hit with gunfire, synagogues firebombed, community centers and old age homes vandalized, hospitals protested, summer camps threatened, Jewish students and campus groups vilified, and Jewish-owned businesses boycotted. You then go on to say that these repeated incidents have become as much a part of being Jewish in Canada in 2026 as the police presence outside synagogues and the enhanced security for community events. The unmistakable message, echoing that dark era in Europe in the 1930s, is that Jews are not welcome here. That's a pretty chilling indictment of the climate that Canadian Jews face today, isn't it?
It is, but I must admit, I think with enormous regret, I think it's accurate and reflects how many in the community feel. I was speaking just yesterday with someone who was talking about attending synagogue services wearing a flak jacket. When you take your kids to school, there are multiple security measures that exist. It's akin to going to an embassy or trying to get through an airport at times. I mean, this is Canada in 2026. And listen, these issues, I think, stem from a number of factors, but my view, and it's expressed in the piece, is that we desperately need leadership to stand up and make clear that this is wrong, won't be tolerated, and that action's going to accompany it. And I certainly welcome what we saw yesterday, but it needs to be seen as a start, certainly not a wholesome solution.
Right, and in another piece that you wrote right after the Bondi Beach massacre, you stated, quote, "Too often leaders avoid references to anti-Semitism or couch it with an all hate matters message." So can you elaborate on why it is so important for leaders to call out anti-Semitism full stop without conflating anti-Semitism with other forms of hate as condemnable as those other forms of hate may be?
Yeah, thank you. And to be clear, of course, all hate does matter. But in this instance, when you look at the data, the amount of anti-Semitism and the violence that's accompanying it far outstrips any other groups that's targeted, and it is a very small group in Canada. And too often, we see people who are not willing to call it out, or frankly, not stepping up at all. So enormous respect to the ministers and the MPs that appeared yesterday in terms of trying to provide additional funding. But candidly, it's the same faces, largely MPs of Jewish background or who come from constituencies where there is a larger Jewish presence. This is a Canadian issue. This is an issue that we've got a group in Canada that, as I say, has trouble sending their kids to school or going to their place of worship or to a community center without all sorts of security. We'll know that we're dealing with this more effectively when it's the MPs that don't have large Jewish constituencies that are standing up and speaking out on these issues. When it's the various other business leaders and community leaders and religious leaders that may not for the moment be directly affected by this, but should recognize that this affects us all, and we really need a full, all the various communities speaking out.
Thank you for that. Canadian taxpayers spend $1.4 billion annually to fund the state broadcaster, the CBC. Earlier this year, B'nai B'rith released a report in which they did an analysis on CBC coverage. What B'nai B'rith found was a vast gap in terms of bias targeted towards Israel, that references to things such as Israeli civilians had been virtually airbrushed from CBC's coverage since October 7th. And the conclusion of the report is that, in fact, CBC has contributed to fueling anti-Semitic hate in Canada. Do you share B'nai B'rith's conclusion and the concerns that they have raised?
A very brief answer, Professor Geist.
I think there are. I think the Jewish community has a lot of concerns with the kind of coverage that's out there, whether the CBC or otherwise. And I think that the effect is a combination of all sorts of things. It's not just on the leadership side. I think media unquestionably has a difference. It has the lack of accountability and the issues that arise on campus has an impact. So we are seeing all of this come together. And what we are also seeing is this escalation of violence, rising to the level literally of shooting at synagogues this past weekend. And my enormous fear, and what prompted me to write the piece you mentioned, is that it doesn't end there. That the Bondi Beach and the murders that we saw in the United States, in Colorado and Washington, it feels that that is the next step here if we don't step up and say that this simply can't continue in Canada.
Yeah, we're well over.